definition that we have at GGGI. So I'll just read it out to you, which is a city, town, city region, which pursues resource efficient, low carbon, climate resilient, and socially inclusive urban development, generating green job opportunities. It is quite a bit, but the idea why we have such an extensive definition for green cities is that we understand cities to be, they're almost mini countries in some ways, so you have to look at it from a wholesome picture and not in silos. So we think you have to address each one of these issues to be able to achieve green cities. And we'll get into that as and when we proceed with the presentation. We work in 3 priority areas: mainstreaming green growth into urban financing, management, and planning, supporting circular urban systems and economies, and sustainable urban infrastructure and transport to support connected and healthy cities. These are the 3 pillars that we work with, and we've divided them into subsectors. So we have projects in each one of these areas. Most of the work that we do is usually aligned to national priorities, again, because we work directly with governments. So before we really get into what is smart and green for us, I'd like to take a few moments to just hear from you today on what your thoughts are between what is smart and green. And why we have this diagram here is we're trying to understand exactly what we mean by smart and what are some of the traditional definitions, but also green, and really if there's a nexus of the two, and what do we understand by it. And I'll just say that there's no right or wrong answer, so for now, if you could just maybe just shout out your answers and help me understand what your thoughts are on smart and green. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer at this point, but we're trying to understand, well, how do we think about some of these things, especially when we're looking at designing new cities. So we're looking at, one thing that I do want to point out at the nexus is that, well, this is a definition that we use at GGGI, a working definition again that we have for smart cities, which is a smart city is green and a green city is smart. Why? Because a smart green city is well governed, inclusive, it manages its eco-resources sustainably, and through the use of information and communications technology, it's able to provide efficient, affordable, and effective services to all through smart approaches and systems. Basically, the idea that we're getting at here is that you have all the means and technologies at your disposal that you can use to be able to achieve smart cities. ICT is not the end. It is a means to an end. It is a way to get to smart and green. The traditional understanding of smart cities has been technology, as you rightly pointed out. And that was because when we started, we had all this technology that came into, that was promoted across the world, and especially in terms of we're looking at CCTV cameras, sensors, GPS systems, satellite systems. So all of a sudden we had all this data available for us with the use of internet and the use of technology. But what were we really doing with this technology? Were we managing it anyway, or was it just being produced and going and sitting on someone's computer somewhere? So the idea was to really start working up towards this pyramid and all the way to the top, which is decision making, which is, can we then start using the numbers that are coming out to be able to understand how do we as people move in our cities? Urban spaces are about movement of people, right? It's about the likes of you and me when we go from our homes to our workplace and back, our children go to school and back. How do we move in these urban environments, and how do we use our home spaces and also the city spaces? The amount of data being generated at any given time. All of us have smartphones, so can you imagine every second along the way there's some data being sent back to some server? So can we then use this data to our advantage? Now, I'm not saying that this is smart cities is the way to accomplish green cities as well, but it's also, it definitely comes with its own challenges, and we don't have a perfect answer at this point. But the examples that we see from around the world are just to help us, to get us to start thinking about how technology has been implemented. I'd like to present, as we go through this, the presentation, some of the cases that we see from across the world. But this is not the perfect example. They all come with its own challenges, and even in places where they've adopted some of these cases, they haven't been able to implement it fully. But let's walk through this. And if you have any questions along the way, please let me know. I'd just like to touch upon a little bit about the limits of separation. Now, we've talked about the nexus of what smart and green is, but really, how do we start maybe thinking about the two a little bit on their own? And as you very rightly pointed out, that smart means the use of technology and energy, but also it has a very high environmental cost to it. When we install all the information technology in our cities, it uses energy. Where does that energy come from? Is it still powered by the grid? How do I get my electricity at the grid? Is it fossil fuel powered? Is it renewable energy? And then what happens to all the technology that I have put into place at the end of its life cycle? Where does that go? So for instance, we have batteries that are used. Do they end up in the landfill? Or what happens once we finish consuming them? Who uses it after? Or where does it sit for till the end of its lifetime? We've all seen what happens to our computers at the end of the day. What happens to our smartphones at the end of the day once we've finished using them? Right, so these are all questions that we want to start thinking about. Another term that I want to throw out is, when we start thinking about this, we talk about the concept of circular economies, or circularity. From the day that it was produced till once I finished consuming the water, what's actually going to happen to it? And where does the plastic go? Right, so just things like that to think about. So the idea behind smart cities is really to answer this question that we've created these technology-oriented cities, but do they at the end of the day contribute to the sustainability agendas? Are they inclusive? Do they talk about SDGs? Do they link up to that aspect at all? Maybe that's where green starts to come into the picture, that we want to look at the complete picture as to when we design our cities all the way from the start to the end. I'll start talking a little bit about urban infrastructure that we have. We have a lot of buildings in place. We're looking at sustainable, a lot of substantial energy consumption in our cities. And we want to look at, well, as and when cities urbanize, especially in the African region, one of the fastest urbanizing continents along with Asia, there is a significant demand for new infrastructure. So how are we catering to this demand, right? In some of the other countries, in the developed countries, just to help you think about this, to present the other picture, they've already built most of their infrastructure. So the issue that they're dealing with is that of aging infrastructure. Once it's served its purpose and when it's served its life, how does it actually, how do we deal with building new infrastructure? Is that going to be low carbon? Is that energy efficient? Is that environmentally friendly by any means? So these are some problems up here on the left that we're quite familiar with, right? We have pipelines that burst, we have unpaved roads, or we have potholes on our roads. What we want to start looking at is how the digital infrastructure starts talking to the physical infrastructure. And if we can get them to work together to serve our purpose at the end of the day, which is green infrastructure or even climate resilient infrastructure. These are a few examples of some of the applications of smart technology in urban infrastructure. For instance, in some countries, they're using sensors here to put on bridges to see old infrastructure that is perhaps not performing well or needs maintenance and upkeep. The sensors send a signal back to the control centers, and someone comes in and fixes this, or if parts need to be replaced. Some bridges use solar panels on the side to maximize the use of space in terms of generating renewable energy. We've all been in a situation where we've tried to find an empty car park, but spent hours doing so. So hopefully car park vacancy guides can help us understand what are the options that we have, and if they're full, so we spend less time looking for car parking. In some countries, not all, though, they have automated lighting in parks to be able to encourage safe public spaces. this is just, I guess, to help us understand some statistics to what the opportunity is in terms of achieving commercial smart buildings. And by smart, this is again use of technology, looking at energy efficiency and solar panels. Especially in the Middle East and African region, we see currently it's 4.6%, but hopefully and it is estimated that this number will go up to 5.1%. But again, shows how in the future they could actually, this is an opportunity for construction right here. Just very briefly talking about smart and affordable homes. These are again some of the technology that could be implemented in homes to deal with climate change, or even for resource efficiency as and when we construct and use our homes. So we're talking about security systems such as CCTV cameras, water pipe sensors, so that we don't manually have to dig holes every time, but there's a sensor that's placed on water pipes and we're able to work with maintaining our existing infrastructure. This is an application that has been developed in some parts of the world. It's very easy to use even for laymen like us. And the idea behind such an application is for people to be able to, when we want to design new homes, we usually go to an architect or somebody who understands how to build homes. And they give us a design, which is little drawings on a piece of paper, which none of us really understand. But what this application does is it helps us to visualize what the plan looks like and understand how we move around in our homes, how can we best adapt it to the local environment, to the local climate, but also at the same time be able to understand what kind of construction materials will I use. This is a very simple, very basic design, a one-room shed that's shown here. But you can build on top of this to understand, well, what are some of the construction materials that I will be using, so that at the end of the day, I can minimize the amount of wastage from materials and I can efficiently use what I want. Ultimately, it is all about resource efficiency also. So in such cases, if I can plan what I need for the future, then I should be able to use only as much as I need, as opposed to using more and then throwing away the rest. What is it that we need to do? Within the waste sector, now of course this is very high level, the waste sector, there's many kinds of waste that we're looking at, even within cities. But we urgently need to address separation at source instead of just taking all our waste and dumping it into landfills and dump sites. We want to be able to understand if waste is actually waste that will go sit in a landfill, or can we actually reuse some of it? Right? Again, talking about the concept of circular economies, can I start using my materials to go back and feed into another process, right, where it might be useful? We want to see if we can create economic opportunities around all types of waste. If I have to start looking at circular economies, if this plastic bottle, for instance, needs to go into some other industrial process, who will collect it from me and actually take it to that point? Can I then create job opportunities for people to fit into that system? And then also looking at integrated resource management solutions. So how can we look at, well, waste, instead of looking at it as waste, if it's a resource, how do I then start looking at it as an integrated solution that feeds into other processes? So one process talks to another and not only in silos. This is an example of waste segregation in South Korea. I can't just dump my waste on the street there. I do have to, the food waste and the general waste goes into these bags. The yellow ones are for food waste, the white ones are for general waste. And the way I use this is I will go to a designated area to buy these bags, fill them up with my trash, and then throw them again in a designated spot. And yes, I did get asked this question over the last couple of days, that what happens if I don't throw my trash into this, or if I throw the wrong type of trash into each one of these bags? I can tell you that there are CCTV cameras in every waste deposit area. We have had instances of the police will come through and the gentlemen who collect the waste have actually opened the bags and seen that you've put the wrong waste, and they've come knocking on the door and said, you put in the wrong waste, you better make sure you don't do it again. So there is that monitoring system, so each user has to be careful about how they they segregate their waste. So as a result of these initiatives, the amount of waste generation has reduced by 16.6%, almost, and the recycling rate has gone up to almost 43%. We'll talk a little bit about smart and green mobility. Everybody's familiar with sitting in traffic for hours, right? I have heard notorious things about Cairo's traffic, and I completely understand. I come from India, and I trust you. We've all sat through traffic for hours on end. And we all understand how important time is. There's only so many hours in a day. So how do we start integrating technology with the way that we move around our cities? So these are two aspects that I'd like to talk about in terms of smart and green mobility, right? Of course, we have the technology in place where we all have smartphones, we all use Uber, we all have GPS systems, we're all familiar with Google Maps. These are all examples of technologies that we use within our lives, so it's not something complicated that somebody else uses. But we're using it as well to be able to understand, well, if we want an estimate of how much time it takes to get from point A to point B, we definitely get on Google Maps to see what the traffic situation's like, and it helps us to plan our commute on a daily basis, right? But also I'd like to address a little bit about the concept of planned cities. It's really talking about, if I start looking at cities, have the urban planners that work towards developing cities, have they thought about the way that we as people move? Where is it that we live? And where is it that we travel to go to work? Where is it that we go to school? Is it really long distances that we have to travel on a daily basis? Can we, in some way, when we think about our cities, try and narrow those distances? Can we maybe live closer to where we need to work? Is that an option or not? In some cities, some of the older cities, when they were designed, it was all about living in one place, working in one place. And most cities actually started out as farmlands, right? We weren't cities many, many, many hundred years ago. Cities are only over time that have been created, and now we have this accumulation of humans that live in settlements. About planned cities is that you want mixed-use development. You want to make sure that you live in the same space, you're able to shop for your groceries in the same place, you're able to work in the same place. So it maximizes the amount of time that you use in a day. This is just to talk a little bit about what we know already and what we've heard in terms of public and private green transportation. We're all familiar with private vehicles, with electric cars, with autonomous vehicles, as you rightly mentioned. But some of the challenges that come with this is that we have all this technology at our hands, but what happens again to the battery at the end of the day? What is the electricity that is providing the energy for me to be able to run these cars? In some countries, and maybe not in Cairo, but in some countries where the weather permits, can I encourage the use of non-motorized transportation? And what do I mean by that? It's basically encouraging the use of cycling, encouraging the use of walking. If I can walk 5 minutes to get to my destination, do I really need to take my car out? If it's not too hot, is it possible for me to do that? This is just very briefly to present the case study from Seoul to look at what the transportation system. They developed this integrated transportation system that looks at the use of buses, bikes, the subway, and also taxis. And the idea was to create real-time monitoring systems, so they're able to have each of these means of mode talk to each other. So if I'm looking at the subway, I can download an app on my phone and I should be able to understand when the next train will come in, when the next bus will come in. And many times when I travel around the city, I should be able to understand, well, if I have to move from the subway to the bus to the bicycle, I can do that immediately and know what is the availability without having to sit and wait for it. Again, in the case of Medellin, a similar integrated mobility system was designed, but the way they went about it was slightly different. It's because The problem that they had, unlike to Seoul, is that they had a city that was highly unsafe, not one that was highly congested. So how do you deal with public safety with the concept of integrated transportation? And the way they did that was they created mobility plans for each one of these systems here, which is for the road network, the bicycle network, the subways. They have trams in place. They have public buses, and they created master plans for each one of these. And how did they implement this? Is you'll see in this picture up here, this is a before, and this is an after. Once the plans were created, this is how they implemented in terms of the road networks were narrowed here instead of widened, so that they discouraged the use of cars and encouraged the use of walking and cycling. And why did they want to do that? Is because if more people walked and got out on the streets, there were lesser rates of crime that were taking place. So instead of being holed up in your cars, you have more people interacting with each other and talking to each other, right? And it actually worked. Medellin is now one of the safer cities. There has been decreased crime rates. There's reduced congestion, of course, as a result of this. And of course, there's increased walking and cycling.